Today, the Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth, a seemingly endless landscape of rocky plateaus, gravel plains, towering sand dunes, and scorching heat. It stretches across an area roughly comparable to the entire United States, yet less than 1% of it contains permanent greenery or water. During the day, temperatures can become brutally hot. At night, the desert can turn surprisingly cold, sometimes dropping below freezing during winter. Sandstorms sweep across the landscape. Water is extremely scarce, and both humans and wildlife are forced to survive under some of the harshest conditions on the planet. But here is the astonishing part. The Sahara was not always a desert. Only a few thousand years ago, much of this dry and lifeless landscape was covered by green grasslands, wooded savannas, wetlands, rivers, and enormous freshwater lakes. Herds of elephants, giraffes, antelope, and buffalo wandered across the region. Hippos and crocodiles lived in its waterways, while human communities built settlements along the shores. This extraordinary chapter in Earth's history is known as the African Humid Period, or, more dramatically, the Green Sahara. The first clues to this forgotten world began appearing during European expeditions in the 19th century. Deep inside areas that are now almost completely barren, explorers discovered ancient rock carvings and paintings. Instead of showing endless dunes, the artwork depicted human settlements, livestock, hunters, swimmers, and animals that could no longer survive in the modern Sahara. Some of the carvings showed giraffes, elephants, lions, leopards, rhinos, and other animals normally associated with the grasslands of sub-Saharan Africa. Why would ancient people carve these animals into rocks in the middle of one of the driest places on Earth? By the late 20th century, researchers had uncovered even stronger evidence. Beneath the sand, they found the remains of ancient river channels, lake beds, aquatic animals, and layers of sediment that could only have formed in much wetter conditions. Together, these discoveries revealed that the Sahara had experienced a remarkable transformation. The Green Sahara existed roughly between 14,600 and 5,000 years ago. This means that when some of the world's earliest civilizations were beginning to develop, large areas of the Sahara were still green and filled with life. Before this humid period began, however, conditions were extremely different. During the last glacial maximum, when massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, the Sahara was even drier and more extensive than it is today. The desert may have stretched hundreds of miles farther south, consuming much of the region now known as the Sahel. The Ice Age weakened the West African monsoon system, causing rainfall to decline dramatically. Lakes across Africa shrank or disappeared. Ecosystems collapsed, and evidence of human occupation within the Sahara became extremely rare. Many people were likely forced to move toward more reliable sources of water, including the Mediterranean coast and the Nile Valley. Then, the climate began to change. As the Ice Age weakened, gradual changes in Earth's orbit altered the amount and seasonal distribution of sunlight reaching the northern hemisphere. Summers became more intense, warming the African continent and strengthening the monsoon winds that carried moisture northward from the Atlantic Ocean. Rain began reaching places that had remained dry for thousands of years. Ancient lakes and rivers started filling again. Plants spread northward, grasslands expanded, and soils began forming across the previously barren landscape. This created a powerful natural feedback loop. More rain produced more vegetation. The expanding vegetation reduced the amount of sunlight reflected by the ground, helped retain moisture, and prevented dust from rising into the atmosphere. These changes strengthened the monsoon even further, allowing additional rainfall to move deeper into the Sahara. In some regions, annual rainfall increased many times over. Across the Sahara as a whole, precipitation may have been several times greater than it is today. In only about 1,000 years, one of the driest regions on Earth, was transformed into a vast network of grasslands, rivers, wetlands, and lakes. Despite the dramatic title often used to describe this period, the entire Sahara did not become a dense jungle like the Amazon. Most of it probably resembled an open African savanna, containing grasses, shrubs, scattered trees, and patches of woodland. Dense vegetation, swamps, and jungle-like environments were concentrated around rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Even so, the Green Sahara was unlike any environment that exists on Earth today. As vegetation expanded, animals followed. Great herds entered territories that are now completely inhospitable. Elephants, giraffes, antelope, buffalo, zebras, rhinos, lions, leopards, and wild cattle spread across the region. Birds occupied the forests and wetlands, while hippos, crocodiles, turtles, fish, and mollusks flourished in its waterways. Some of these animals still survive elsewhere in Africa. Others have since disappeared forever, including the North African elephant, the bubble hartebeest, giant wild cattle, and Syncerus antiquus, a massive prehistoric buffalo that could weigh close to 2 tons and possessed enormous horns. Although the Green Sahara was much wetter, it was not necessarily cool. Temperatures were still high, but trees, grass, shade, and abundant water made the landscape far more habitable than the desert we know today. The transformation of the region's waterways was especially dramatic. The Nile River became much larger and more powerful, possibly reaching 2 or 3 times its modern size in some areas. Heavy rainfall farther south sent enormous amounts of water flowing northward, producing floods far greater than those recorded in recent history. This period is sometimes called the Wild Nile. The river repeatedly overflowed its banks and submerged enormous areas of land. At times, these floods may have made sections of the Nile Valley too unstable for permanent settlement. Yet the expanded river also created rich habitats. Fish, turtles, amphibians, mollusks, crocodiles, and many other aquatic animals thrived in and around the Nile. On its banks lived gazelles, hippos, rhinos, buffalo, hyenas, wildebeest, zebras, elephants, and other large animals. In terms of wildlife, the ancient Nile Valley may have resembled an even wetter and more unpredictable version of today's Serengeti. But the Nile was not the most impressive body of water in the Green Sahara. That distinction may have belonged to Lake Mega Chad. Modern Lake Chad sits near the borders of Chad, Nigeria, Niger, and Cameroon. Today, it is only a fraction of its former size. During the African Humid Period, however, it expanded into an enormous freshwater lake, sometimes known as Mega Chad. At its greatest extent, the lake may have stretched approximately 620 miles from one end to the other, and covered an area comparable to the modern Caspian Sea. It occupied a significant portion of the Central Sahara and was one of the largest lakes on Earth at the time. Despite its immense surface area, Mega Chad was relatively shallow. Nevertheless, it supported a rich aquatic ecosystem and attracted large herds of animals to its shores. Its enormous size may even have influenced local weather, increasing rainfall around its edges and creating productive habitats across the surrounding region. Humans also returned to the Sahara as conditions improved. Approximately 1,000 years after the humid period began, communities started spreading across mountains, grasslands, river valleys, and lake shores. Some people lived in caves and rock shelters, while others built settlements beside dependable water sources. Many communities relied heavily on fishing, hunting, and collecting aquatic resources. Archaeologists sometimes describe these water-dependent cultures as aqualithic societies. Lakes and rivers provided such an abundance of food that some groups were able to remain in the same area for generations. The Sahara contains one of the greatest concentrations of prehistoric rock art in the world. These images provide a remarkable record of daily life. They show people hunting, herding animals, traveling, swimming, and gathering together. Some sites reveal continuous human occupation lasting hundreds or even thousands of years. As the environment remained productive, human societies continued to develop. By around 7,000 years ago, cattle, goats, and sheep were being raised across parts of the Sahara. Pastoralism became increasingly important, supporting larger populations and encouraging more permanent settlements. Stone tools became more refined, artistic traditions grew more complex, and communities developed new ways to survive in changing environments. The Green Sahara was not merely a refuge for human life. It became an important center of cultural and technological development. But this golden age could not last forever. Beginning around 5,500 years ago, changes in Earth's orbit gradually reduced the strength of Northern Hemisphere summers. The African monsoon weakened, and the rains began retreating southward. Vegetation started to die. Grasslands shrank, rivers stopped flowing, and lakes became smaller. As the ground became exposed, stronger winds lifted more dust into the atmosphere. That dust reflected sunlight and interfered with rainfall, accelerating the drying process. The same environmental feedback loop that had helped create the Green Sahara now began working in reverse. One of the most dramatic examples occurred in the Beaudelet Depression, once part of the bed of Lake Mega Chad. As the lake disappeared, its exposed sediments became an enormous source of dust. Today, the Beaudelet Depression is considered one of the most significant natural dust-producing regions on Earth. As water vanished, animal populations declined or moved south. Some species disappeared from North Africa completely. Human communities also faced a devastating choice: adapt to an increasingly dry landscape or leave. Permanent settlements became less common. Pastoral groups became more mobile, following the remaining grasslands and water sources. Other populations migrated toward the Mediterranean coast, the Sahel, and the Nile Valley. In some areas, the transformation from green savanna to desert may have occurred in only a few centuries. A landscape that had supported rivers, wildlife, and thriving communities became the enormous desert we recognize today. Yet the disappearance of the Green Sahara may have helped shape one of the greatest civilizations in history. During the humid period, the Nile Valley could be dangerous and difficult to occupy because of its enormous floods. But as the climate became drier, the Nile shrank and stabilized. Fertile land appeared along its banks, while the surrounding desert pushed people toward the river's dependable water supply. Increasing numbers of migrants gathered in the Nile Valley. They brought knowledge, livestock, technology, and cultural traditions from different parts of North Africa. Over time, these communities became more organized, contributing to the rise and eventual unification of ancient Egypt around 3000 BC. In other words, the death of the Green Sahara may have helped create the world of the pharaohs. The story may not be over. The Sahara has repeatedly shifted between dry and humid conditions over geological time. Based on the long-term cycles in Earth's orbit, a greener Sahara could eventually return, perhaps in about 10,000 years. Modern human-driven climate change may complicate that natural cycle, making the exact future difficult to predict. For now, the ancient rivers remain buried beneath the sand, and the images carved into desert rocks serve as silent reminders of a lost world. The Sahara teaches us that even the most permanent-looking landscapes can change beyond recognition. A desert can become a vast green savanna, filled with lakes, wildlife, and human communities, and then, in only a few centuries, disappear beneath dust and sand. Today's Sahara may look timeless, But hidden beneath its surface is the memory of an entirely different Africa, a forgotten world where elephants crossed green plains, hippos lived in enormous lakes, and human communities thrived in places that are now among the driest on Earth.